For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Whether you're here in the Cayman Islands or whether you're listening via the web overseas. And I want to give a special shout out to the Forbes family. You always hear me talk about them. My good friends over in New York. And also a friend in Barbados, Mr. Rudon Eversley, if he's listening in. Rudon is was in the communications field, is now into doing political consultancy. Worked here in the Cayman Islands for quite a while, and we developed a good relationship in terms of our work, and he has been listening over in Barbados as well. So Rudon, if you're listening this morning, a pleasant good morning to you, and I hope everything is fine in Barbados and the Forbes in New York, and those of you who are listening in Houston, others in New York, and all over the place. We want to say a pleasant good morning to you as well, and of course to our listeners here in Grand Cayman, Cayman Brac, and Little Cayman. Of course, For the Record is a show produced for you by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and is produced specifically and geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out in the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor. Some people call me OC also, and sometimes they call me other things as well. And you can always join me on For the Record on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. And sometimes we irk management a little bit because we end up going beyond the 9:30 hour. But that means that we have an interesting topic and an interested audience. So we know that radio programs operate on a tight schedule, but sometimes we overdo it a little bit, and that may say something about the show itself that we need to look to extending it again. But for now, we will go with the 2-hour period. I also want to remind you that our phone lines are always open, and there's always someone waiting to answer your calls. And I need to continue to repeat those phone numbers in the morning, because some mornings when we get deep into the conversation, I forget to remind people, and there are others who want to call in but are unsure of what the number is. So the first number that we have is a toll-free number, and it is 1-800-534-8255, or you can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990, and we will always continue to repeat those numbers for you. You can also email us at For the Record, one word, For the Record at candw.ky. Now, the last several weeks, Fridays, we have had our usual cast on For the Record in the form of Mr. Ivan Farrington, Captain Paul Hurlston, and Mr. Steve McPhail. And what we have been doing here is trying to keep the history of the Cayman Islands alive. In particular, the seafaring days. On Wednesday, when we had Mr. Miller on the show, we talked about the Legislative Assembly and some of the research that I have been doing on the Legislative Assembly's website and their archives, and looking at the meetings of the Legislative Assembly. And I found some of those meetings extremely interesting and important. Those that were being held in West Bay while the Legislative Assembly building was being constructed in Georgetown. So we want to keep the history of the Cayman Islands alive. And when we get back to our regular programming, where we will have the opposition on Fridays, we hope that somewhere along the line we'll be able to continue to fit these conversations in, because the feedback, the very extremely positive feedback that we've been getting from you, our listening audience, and your interaction and participation in these discussions about the history of the Cayman Islands are also extremely important to us as well. And before I introduce my guest, on Wednesday we had some difficulties with our internet, and I threw out one question about the West Wind building, and Ms. Darlene Glidden came back with a response that I didn't see on Wednesday, but I want to acknowledge it now, because we were asking who were the contractors and who actually built the West Wind building, because there was a reference in the throne speech by Governor Crook thanking Mr. Jean Doucette for allowing them to use offices in the West Wind building after the government house burnt down. And so Ms. Glidden has come back to us and said this building was built by a company called Worldwide Helicopters. And she says a Mr. Basilman, I believe, was the name of one of the persons involved, and another, I believe, was Mr. Sumardison. So that she came back with us, on, and I'm extremely thankful for Ms. Glidden, for that as well. So, with those few words, I want to introduce my regular guests to For the Record on Friday mornings, Mr. Ivan Farrington. Mr. Farrington, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And Captain Paul, good morning.
Good morning.
And Mr. Macfield, good morning. I know you're an extremely busy man, and it seems as if, and I know you can't talk about the case now, and we won't talk about it, but it seems as if things are starting to wrap up. So, within the next few days, we should have.
The case is actually going to go to the jury now. The defense yesterday made a no case submission, and the judge ruled on it yesterday late in the afternoon, and said that he's decided to send the case to the jury. And so today, I believe that the Crown will be presenting their case to the jury, and after that will be the defense case, and then the judge will sum up probably Monday or Tuesday or something like that. So I figure by Wednesday the case should be over.
Okay. Yesterday, a friend of mine asked me, and he lives here, but originally from another jurisdiction, and wanted to know whether in Cayman, in jury cases, whether you needed to have unanimity in terms of a decision, or whether or not it's a majority decision by the jury.
In Cayman, you have a majority. Where you have a 7-man jury, like this one, it's 5-2. And when you have a like a murder case 12 jury, it's 10-2.
Okay, so
it's 9-3.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be unanimous.
No.
Because he was saying in the country that he was from that it used to be unanimity, but it proved extremely costly, because if you ended up not having a unanimous decision and a hung jury, then it's additional cost for everyone, especially if you have to have a retrial.
Yeah, and but a court would like to have a unanimous jury, but then if you are not arriving at a unanimous decision, the judge usually have a particular warning, a particular direction, and can send them out again, and that's the judge's prerogative. And then he can direct them that if they can't find it unanimously, then must be a majority decision.
Great. Okay, let's take a quick look at the headlines this morning. Care pay profits go to St. Lucia Company, and that is still a matter of, I think the Ministry of Health is looking into this whole care pay system. Actor Jack Nicholson drops in at Tortuga Club. And I think this is extremely important. Sometimes we don't know how many celebrities come to the Cayman Islands because they're allowed to be here and no one makes a big fuss about them. Maybe waiters may meet them and stuff like that, but they're not mobbed by people in terms of wanting to get autographs and stuff like that. And that is something that is unique about Cayman, and we want that to continue, as well. So that is good there, but good to see that he was here. Then we see the chikungunya cases more than doubling in the Cayman Islands. And I think in the news this morning, Dr. Kumar acknowledged that we had probably over 50 cases in the Cayman Islands now as well. That is worrying. I know right now we're planning a ride in Jamaica in the middle of October, and we are now reviewing our options depending on what the situation is over there, because it appeared as if it was reaching epidemic proportions in Jamaica as well. So it is something that we would want to ensure that we bring under control here. And the Compass's editorial this morning, fear of crime undermining life in Cayman. Extremely, extremely important. Sometimes we don't read about it, but we keep hearing, about condominiums being burglarized and some of the guests being traumatized. We have to put our foot down against crime. We have to clamp down on it. We have to stop being soft on criminals. We have to recognize that not everyone can be rehabilitated. And those who cannot be rehabilitated, then the government and the system needs to have a way of being able to control them. And if it means incarceration for long periods of time, to protect the rest of society, we must think about the whole rather than the individual part sometimes. And in this case, that needs to be done. Otherwise, the reputation that we have as being a safe jurisdiction for tourists, but not only for tourists, but for people who work, live, and make this island their home, we have to ensure that we do something about that. And I'm going to give you three gentlemen. I know this has nothing to do, about seamanship, but we got the discipline, there. And I want you all to comment on it. And first, we'll ask Mr. McField, because this is his, line of work.
Well, it has much to do with seamanship, because when we were in the height of the seaman era, I would say from the 1930s until the 1970s, we had one little jail in Georgetown, the old jail, and sometimes it would be there for years and years and didn't have a prisoner, and then it would have like one person in jail, and usually that person wanted to be in jail because that person would admit to everything that was happening, so he could get back there, because he got 3 meals a day, and he had a place to sleep, and the jail was open, the door was open, he could go and come when he felt like. I think that we ought to start to look at some of the reasons for crime. Although there have been so many studies made, and they all sitting on the shelf someplace in a government administration building or in a glass house where they were shelved. But I think we ought to look at the other side of crime, the reasons why people are committing offenses, the reasons why people are before the courts. Because when you are arrested and go before the courts, the judge is not concerned how you got there. He's only concerned that you are committing an offense, but there is no investigation of why you are here, why you are before the courts. Like, I was down in the West Mid District yesterday, and I was talking to some people, even some people in the police force. They were amazed that what is happening now in that district and other district. And then and one guy told me that people actually are with wheelbarrows, going with containers, and to get water. To put the containers in the wheelbarrow to get water, and some people are even using condominium faucets to get water to bathe and stuff, and that is becoming a problem at some condominium complex. So why has the Caymanian people relegated to this and are now committing crimes that they would have never committed before? And then you made an observation just now about Jack Nicholson coming, and you saying that that Caymanian people sort of don't pay much attention to that. That is because Caymanian people are very conservative people, and people like Jack Nicholson or something really don't mean much to them. It is so heartbreaking and difficult to see why has the people plunged the opposite way in less than 1 generation. So we have to look at what's causing the crime, and we have to arrest it before before it gets to the place where people are molested in their homes and in their businesses and on the streets and stuff, because this is a phenomenon that is not it's not typical Caymanian culture. It's not something like what's happening in other jurisdictions, like in America or other places. I noticed when I lived in America when I was young, an American had the whole problem of identity, of being pushed backward, and not able to vote, and not able to get jobs, and whole discrimination problem that they had. They started to have lots of crimes too. They start cutting up their own people, shoot their own people in the ghettos, in Brooklyn and in Baltimore and all those places. We were careful when we went ashore in those places too, because what they did was turn on themselves, because it was safe to do that. It was safe not to blame the people who are causing their position to be untenable. So they turn on themselves, and I think this is what's happening in Cayman. This is some of the reasons happening. People are now turning on themselves, or turning. It's easy enough for me to get mugged in the streets. It's easy for my house to be broken into, or my office to be broken into, because it's easy. But I think we really have to take a really look, and I would ask that perhaps some professional people, sociologists, and all those people coming to Cayman to see what has caused this drastic change in such a peaceful people, because that is why we have such a peaceful society. That is why people came here. That's why we could have such a economic society, build such a bold economic society.
Yep. We have to go to a break now, folks. I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorrit Connor, and my guest in the studio with me this morning, we have Mr. A. Steve McPhail, Captain Paul Hurlston, and Mr. Ivan Farrington. I want to also remind you that For the Record is brought to you by Champion House 2 and Champion House Cafe. Champion House Restaurant 2 and Champion House Cafe. Champion House Restaurant 2 is located on Eastern Avenue, and Champion House Cafe at 1 Butterfield Place, formerly Comart. Champion House is a family-oriented restaurant where locals, and I always say others, dine as well. And also, For the Record is brought to you by the Auto Spa on Godfrey Nixon Way. You can stop by Radio Cayman or the Auto Spa and ask for your $5 savings coupon for your next full service wash. We're going to hear some more from our sponsors. Please stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorrit Connor. My guests in the studio with me this morning, we have Mr. Ivan Farrington, Captain Paul Hurlston, and Mr. A. Steve McPhail. I want to remind you that the numbers that you can call in, our toll-free number, 1-800-534-8255 or 949-8037. And another number, an alternate number, is 949-6990. We were just discussing some of the headlines in the Caymanian Compass, some of the news stories, one in particular about crime in the Cayman Islands, the Compass's editorial about crime in the Cayman Islands and the position that we need to take in the Cayman Islands in terms of being tough on crime. And Mr. McPhail was speaking about that, and I'm going to jump over to Captain Paul Hurlston now. I know that this isn't your line, area of expertise, but certainly you're impacted by it as well.
Yes, good morning. I can remember a lot because, as Mr. McPhail said, it's quite right. It was one person who would relieve your goods, and in those days, and if you lost anything, you knew where to go and find it, and it was discipline, and people respected the police because the police respected you. When Inspector Watler, Sergeant Nixon, and Earl Wood, and Royal Hanson, and all of they would never meet you on the street without saying hello. You felt comfortable to go to, if you seen something wrong, you could go to them, and they would take matters in your hand. But today, if you go to report something to the police, half an hour later, somebody, because I was told by a good friend of mine who is not with us anymore, that he did that one time, and half an hour later, the person he reported on called his sister and cursed her out because her brother reported this. You know, it was somebody that must have reported that time. So you don't feel comfortable. We don't know these people. I don't know why they'll pass you on the street and they never recognize you or say anything. I don't know. They're our big. They think that we're their enemies, their biggest enemy. They never associate with you. I am willing to sit down and talk with any of them and tell them about not ratting on anybody, but about this the culture and the situation. Because a lot of them is from here, are not from here. They do not know the culture. They do not know our background or anything, and apparently they don't want to learn. And the big honchos, hush, you like a piece of, I ain't going to mention a word, but everybody know what I'm talking about on the street. They look down at you because, I mean, I'm so familiar with that. I went through that for so many years on ships that it is not crazy. And it's one thing I would like to say while I'm on this morning. Over 20 years ago, I suggested, I got a copy of it and it came in the papers back home on my record, about this prison, putting towers in the prison. They got all these security cameras and all this thing. You do need put one diagonal. You can watch one side, one guard and watch one side and the other. You don't need all this sophisticated equipment. You need human being up there. If anybody tried to throw anything over the fence, you got binoculars, you got searchlights, or if necessary, you have a rifle or. But people know that they will be detected. You don't need. They spent millions of dollars on this fancy fence. I call it chicken wire fence, and it don't work.
I'm told that we have 2 callers online, so we're going to take those callers now. The first caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing, ma'am?
I'm all right, and good morning to your panel, to every gentleman in there this morning. I hope you have a happy morning, and I hope you are listening, and I want everybody to listen. I have something to say this morning, and it's from my mind to your mind. What's going on in the Cayman Island can be stopped right there. You don't have to go any further. If you just do the right and listen. Cayman Island people come first to get jobs first. They need money to live, to support their family, and they cannot live off a $2 and $3 a week, an hour for what they do in Caymanian work hard. And you people here put Caymanian in these positions to push in wheelbarrows with water. When I came here, Caymanian used to work hard for what they want. If you put a pot on the fire cooking for 20 people, you have to take out your children first. Your family food have to take out first. Why is it you cooked and call everybody outside and give them food to eat and leave your own Caymanian suffering, right? That's why Caymanian going on like this. And I say now, Caymanian need a standard, good living, good pay to run their family, and they wouldn't have to beg to stoop under no one here. You talk about chikungunya, you talk about Ebola. It's right here now because you people created it. What's going on? If you don't look out for your own Caymanian come first. And you know you're going to have here, you're going to have a hell of a riot that you would never get it under control if you don't give Caymanian what they need and what they want. Good standard pay, good liberty that they and their family can live up in principle and have good things, good money, good everything to spend like before. I say it already on the talk show. I say it on the TV that Caymanians men need $15 an hour and women need 10. That's what I have to say, sir.
Okay, caller, thank you very much for that. Thank you, and please continue to listen to the show. And, you know, we hear from you on a regular basis now, and continue to express your views. We have one more caller. Let's see if we can get that caller in before the 8 o'clock news break. Caller, good morning, and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I am for the blast. This is Franklin Smith.
How you doing, Mr. Smith?
I am wonderful. And good morning to your guests.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Connor, I heard you speak about the chikungunya, and then the MRCU person speaking of their spraying. I just like to say that for years now, the Mosquito Research and Control Unit failed to spray the island complete, because what I'm talking about is in Easton, where the big farms are. They never crosses. It's saying is you never cross my mind. They never cross there at all to spray. And mosquitoes are killing you, and especially the gray leg ones. You know, if that's the ones that spotted ones that bring the disease and things, they're there by the thousands, and nobody comes to spray. Nobody sprays in between those trees, or help with going overhead and spraying. So how do they expect to get rid of this thing?
Yep, and caller, I know a few years ago when there were budgetary constraints, that was one of the areas that they cut back on in terms of spraying, which, to me was ill-advised.
That's right. Yep. For years now, the Mosquito Research and Control Unit clean never crosses that airspace. So I'd just like to say that's one of the problems.
We hope that they're listening, and again, we hope we can get some feedback from them as to the frequency with which they will now be fumigating and spraying, and get some feedback from them in relation to that as well. And thank you very much, Mrs. Smith, for that call. Maybe it's like what they say that you start spraying after the horse is going through the. Yep. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. You have a great day, sir. Same to you all. Folks, bye-bye. I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Oric Connor, and my guest in the studio with me this morning, we have Mr. Ivan Farrington, the devil. We have Captain Paul Hurlston, and we have Mr. A. Steve McPhail. Are we ready for the news yet? We're going to go for a news break at this point in time. We want to ask you to stay tuned. We have very interesting things that we will be talking about soon. I will be reading a quote from Miss Anna Hulda Borden in the Legislative Assembly talking about seamen in the Cayman Islands as well. So please stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Talked about, and I'm having difficulty finding it electronically, but she also talked about, when they were talking about the successes that the Cayman Islands had achieved in the early 70s, especially after the exodus from the Bahamas, and we started to see all of these buildings cropping up. We started to see international banks establishing themselves here in the Cayman Islands. We saw the companies registered jump from something like over 1,100 companies registered to over 5,000 companies registered. We saw the boom in condominiums and everything else. And she reminded them that, yes, we have all of this, and tourism now is the mainstay of our economy, and we need to do something about that. We need to ensure that it remains that way, but we must never ever forget that it was the seamen's wages that at one time we had nothing to import to the Cayman Islands. The only thing that we imported, was the seamen's wages that came back home to help to build this country, to build their individual homes and everything else. Mr. McPhail, want to comment?
Well, I think she's right, and I think she was right, and it was not only Miss Annie that was concerned about the proliferation of business and people coming into the country. Also, you had Captain Reed made a lot of speeches in the legislature about that also, and also Mr. Haig and Mr. Jim. I think they saw the rapid changes that were occurring, and they wanted to do something about it. And I think you had a guest on a couple of days ago, and he was saying that somebody on your show some time ago either made a mistake and say that it was Mr. Jim that had brought in the 1972
Cayman protection law.
It wasn't Mr. Jim. Didn't get into power till 1976. So how could it have been him? But he agitated. He was an agitator. That it was his agitation and Captain Reed's agitation and also Haig Boden's agitation that forced them to to bring in a Caymanian protection order to protect the Caymanian people, and you know. And it didn't just start in 1972 because I brought my source because history, and this is our our official history. It's called Founded Upon the Sea, and we paid a lot of money for this to have this guy Crichton write about the history. And this is what Crichton said. This whole thing started. This whole thing about immigration started. The whole thing started back in 1916. It says the search for a suitable immigration policy was by no means a modern development. In 1934, at the height of the Great Depression, a 1916 law designed to prevent entry into the islands of non-Caymanian paupers was repealed, and a far more detailed regulations of immigration law passed into its place. The 1934 law foreshadowed many aspects of future immigration policy. It also gave the first legal definition for Caymanian, and that definition was a person born in the Cayman Islands or of persons born therein of parents, British subjects, and residents more than 12 months. Beside Caymanians, a defined unrestricted entry was permitted to British officers and officials. To non-residents, Britishers who own property within the islands, at least that value at least £100, and to those who were admitted at the governor's or the commissioner's discretion. Bona fide tourists were also allowed free entry, but passengers in transit and visiting seamen were subject to specific regulations. So Miss Annie was right. It was from then that we were concerned about the proliferation of people in our economy and the change of life in our economy, and so it was the 1916 law, the 1934 law, that preceded the 1972 law. And if you can see, look at the 1972 law. They were concerned that all the companies and all the business were coming here were going to put us as a disadvantage. So one of the highlights of the 1972 law was the ownership of companies. Local companies.
60-40
relationship.
60-40. Yeah, we have a caller online. Let's grab that caller now. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record. No one there. We lost that caller at this time. Sorry about that. Mr. Ivan, we're going to come back to Mr. McField for a minute, but we saw, and I spoke about this again on Wednesday also, that in 1971, the legislature met in West Bay. And that was because the Legislative Assembly building was being constructed. I guess they would have had the meetings in the Georgetown Town Hall, but because of the noise from the construction, it moved to West Bay. And a gentleman by the name of Bill Farrington, someone you probably know about, introduced, welcomed them to West Bay. Mr. A.C. Long, who was the president of the legislature at that time, welcomed them to West Bay, and they had the meetings in West Bay. Were you around then? Where were you?
I was around, but when they had a meeting, I was still going to see, and I was stopped going to December 71, so I'm more than sure I went home at that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But
they had one in December of 71 too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I don't remember that meeting. I remember most of them in 72. I remember the one that they batten up the Georgetown Town Hall, put plywood on it because they was very scared of they were doing some things and the public was not pleased with it.
Those were the land laws at the time that were being.
And they had two English warships out there, and they batten up all of the windows with plywood. And I remember Mr. Willa Farrington and Credo Ebanks, the two in particular, told the governor, or he wasn't governor then, he was administrator then, or what it was, they would not sit in that town hall and button up windows, and they made them took down all the plywood from the windows. And when we went in, they searched all of us for weapons or what they had because they were a little scared that things would happen then because tempers was high then. We felt that they were doing us injustice. So, but I remember that. And 72 was the year that I run. I thought I could have done a better job than who represent me then. And I made a good showing. But my daughter said, why I didn't win, I bought the wrong running shoes.
It seems as if we have that caller back and another one. 2 callers online. Caller number 1. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you, Mr. Wood.
Good morning, Mr. Hurlston. How are you?
That's fine, thank you, sir. Captain Paul, Devin himself, Mr. Ivan, Mr. Steve McFeely.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Glad to hear you gentlemen on reinforcing what many of us see. We've got to step back and respect the contribution that our seamen made. It must be reinforced. It should be every day. And that our young people can learn who really built this country and put it on a footing where others could come and enjoy and become immensely wealthy in a short time. What you're saying there, Mr. Steve, so rang true with me. And by the way, Mr. O, see, that man's name was Arne Sumer-Ledison with the Worldwide Helicopters.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
Sure
Thanks for
was
that.
his name.
Thank you.
Arne Sumer-Ledison.
Okay.
What you're saying there about Mr. Jim, the 76 elections, I remember very well because it is the only time that I've ever written a letter to the newspaper. I wrote a letter to I don't know if it was called the Compass then or the Cayman Weekly. It could have been the Compass. And because people were saying that those who supported Mr. Jim were the less educated or people who were more sort of ignorant and fool, I guess we call it who came on with. But so I wrote a letter in defense of that because so many people were thinking that if you're following Mr. Jim, it's because you're dumb or so forth. It was just he was a man of the people. And it's like Buster Manton and those great ones. They were not over-educated men, but they had the charisma and the right attitude, the right way of thinking about their people, that their people knew that this was the person to support the majority of people. Just to touch on the politics a little bit, Miss Annie's days is very far different from now. The biggest ship coming in then, I think, docking would have been the Cork Chief. And you could put her a looser in some of the big seaboard ships coming into the docks there now. So, but I think Captain Paul is right with the Red Bay idea. And most master mariners I've heard say that that is the correct place. I'm talking about from a long time ago. My own father, the vast different generation, often used to talk about that. And I didn't know where Red Bay was because I hadn't come to live in Cayman really then, just now and then. And then I'd be spending school holidays here in the 50s and early. And I remember looking at it then and saying, well, this is what Papa said, it must be right. Yeah, and the rest of the seamen always saying that too, but it's going to take money, and we know how reluctant wealthy Caymanians are to spend their money. We know that for some reason. I mean, I'm not saying anything we all don't know. It was so good of you, Captain Paul, talking about the Lamberts and all that. I remember my father talking about them and that he used to take fish to them and swap it for bread kind because that was what it was, Petra or Petra plantation. That's what it was. And he often talked about them, the Lamberts and all that. And I just wondered, Captain Paul, I asked this question a few years ago on the radio. Nobody seemed to. My father, he learned his mathematics for his navigation, do his navigation. An old Englishman who was headmaster at Monroe College. He had been relieved of his duties because he was, I guess you could call him an alcoholic, but he was a brilliant mathematician because that was what he was. He was teaching mathematics. And he used to go around. My father had a little store then that his sister, and when my father got married, my mother and Nurse Morris Earlston, my father's sister, they used to run the little store and bake cakes and, and jam some of the grapes and sell it there. And but he was allowed to sell wine to my father never drank at all. And he used to swap him a bottle of wine for, teaching him the mathematics. My father told me that as a child. And I just wondered, I cannot find his name anywhere. If anybody knew of it, I guess all the oldsters who were around there would be long gone. I just wondered if there's any mention of his name ever in your circles, Captain Paul. Anyway, gentlemen, I won't take up more of your time. Keep up the good work. I'm listening on.
Thank you very much, sir. And do continue to listen. Next caller, please. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning. I hope I'm on now.
Oh, yes, you are.
Okay,
We're having some technical difficulties.
Good morning to you, OC. Good morning to Captain Paul, Steve, and Ivy.
Good morning.
The thing is that we're going through something now here in Cayman about labor and minimum wage and all that. And I don't know if you guys know this, but we had a minimum wage from 1946. I was surprised when I was reading the annual report for 1972 or 73. I don't know what happened to it. I just misplaced it someplace. But in that, they were talking about the minimum wage and that it had come about in 1946. And maybe, Steve, you seem to know a lot about these kind of things and, that kind of history. And I wondered if why, since we had a minimum wage, didn't they just pull that out and then revise that to meet, our situation today? But you see, I think the whole thing with minimum wage is like the people who are doing business, the business people. A lot of them don't want to see a minimum wage because not only business people, but a lot of people don't want to see it because they can get away now with paying people little or nothing, and so they poo-poo it and they do all kinds of things. They avoid it, and the politicians listen to them because most of them are, most of their finances for their running campaign they get from these people. So we need to make take a stand and say, let's do it and get it done. But one of the things I just wanted to mention a while, it's a little out of the subject right we're talking about now, but talking about the spray plane, I think Mr. Smith called and talked about it, but I would wish that when they're doing when they're spraying, because yesterday afternoon I go for my walk and it was around 5 o'clock or so, and when I get out on the road, they just run right over me. I had no idea it was coming, and it was spraying the stuff, and I'm trying to run and breathe that crap that was coming out of there. And I just thought maybe it would be a good idea if the MRCU would make an announcement on radio or something which days they're going to do it and what time, so that people, because I saw some people on the beach, little children stuff on the beach that were running, clothing, putting the thing over their nose and stuff to try to get, so maybe that would be a thing to do. But keep up the good work, OC and gentlemen, and I look forward every Friday to hear you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ackerman. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Orrit Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, we have Captain Paul Hurlston, we have Mr. Ivan Farrington, and we have Mr. A. Steve Macfield. I also want to remind you that For the Record is brought to you by Champion House Restaurant 2 and Champion House Cafe. Champion House Restaurant 2 is located on Eastern Avenue and Champion House Cafe at 1 Butterfield Place, formerly Comart. Champion House, of course, is a family-oriented restaurant where locals, and I always say others, dine. And also, for the record, is brought to you by the Auto Spa. And on Fridays, you can come by Radio Cayman or the Auto Spa on Godfrey Nixon Way for your $5 savings coupon for your next full-service wash. So $5 off today. You can pick up your coupon here, or you can pick it up at the Auto Spa, and you get $5 off from your next full-service wash. We're going to take a break. We'll be back shortly. Please stay tuned.
Record with Orit Connor continues right now on Radio Cayman.
Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Orit Connor. My guest in the studio with me, we have Captain Paul Hurlston, Mr. A. Steve McPhail, and the devil himself, Mr. Ivan Farrington. I want to remind you the numbers that you can reach us on to join in our conversation, share your experiences or stories that you've heard about the Cayman Islands with us as well. Our toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. So, Chris, I gave you the numbers the other night. You have it saved in your phone now, so you have no excuse now for not giving us a call. That's Mr. Chris Saunders. I'm talking about my good domino friend, and we had him on the show as well. Just want to give him a good shout-out on a Friday morning, a big shout-out on a Friday morning. Gentlemen, in doing some research on scouting, and I happen to have one of the log books that kept the minutes of the scout meetings. And first, before I get to the point, I just want to point out that Mr. Val Anderson, was the secretary to the association, and that man had an impeccable handwriting. You have to see the handwriting of Mr. Val Anderson. Unbelievable. But I noticed in one of the meetings they talked about the downswing in scouting in the Cayman Islands. The numbers had dropped considerably, and this was around in the early 40s. And the reason that they discovered for that was all of the young men had gone off to the war, had gone off to Trinidad and other places as well. But in talking about that, Captain Paul, you also mentioned the fact that talked about the naval base that the Americans had here, the base, and a minimum wage. Then both you and Mr. Steve McPhail. So I want you first and Mr. Steve McPhail afterwards to comment on that, based on what Mr. Ackerman called in and spoke about.
Yes, during the war, when the U.S. Navy established their base here in Cayman, I don't remember if the late Mr. Patton was commissioner at that time, or the Commissioner J.P. Jones, but I remember it was said that the little supply boats used to come into the dock there. They wasn't very big. And the few men that was around, the stevedores, because the old raid warehouse down there, they had to land their goods in there. And the Navy, Mr. Ainsley Borden was the coordinator between the U.S. government and the U.S. Navy. And they had agreed to pay the stevedores 2 shillings and 6 pence an hour. But Commissioner Jones would not allow it. He paid 9 pennies per hour. Of course, 9 pence an hour those days was probably worth $10 today. But that's how we go. Because it wasn't too many men around. It was young boys and older men, because all the middle, from 18 to 45 to 60 was all out at sea. So that is one little part it just came to me. That I remember talking about minimum wage. That I remember that clearly. Commissioner J.P. Jones would not allow to pay more than 9 pence per hour.
And any idea the reasoning behind that?
He was trying to keep down expense, because during the war everything was ration. People don't realize we had ration here in Cayman too. We had ration. He tried to, I don't know, but I know, I am certain what I'm saying. That's what it, because it was a shoe repairman. Whenever these little boats came in, I always used to go and advise him that there was it, because he didn't go to sea. He used to go down there and get a little job, because money wasn't not that plentiful, you know, and that was sure. If it were only 9 pence an hour, but at the end of the day, he got his money.
Yeah, off the air, we were talking about the men going to sea, especially turtling and stuff like that, and only to find out that it was an unusual situation where you end up going working, and when you come back, instead of you, the company owing you, you ended up owing the company. That phenomenon, Mr. Macfield.
That's right. that is right. And what happened? The merchants and the ship owners they decided to circumvent the minimum wage. I remember my grandfather, who was a shipwright and a carpenter, and I can remember to this day, the salary for a carpenter was £5 a week. £5 a week was the carpenter's wage salary. And the men go back to the merchants. The merchants decided to circumvent paying, and so they designed a system called share. The share system is similar to what's happening in the South when people picking cotton, the share cropping. You would go to Mosquito Key, and they would supply you with food and shelter, and you would work to catch the turtles, but you didn't get paid for that. You got shares of how many, depending on how many turtles they caught. And sometimes when you came back from Mosquito Key, you owed them money for working for them. And I remember there's an old speech in the legislature someplace where one of the parsons who were the clerk of the courts at the time said it was such a pernicious affair that he could not believe that men would do that to other men. And some of the stories are bizarre, but a guy from Breakers told me this story. Tim from Breakers said he went on the Adams, I think it was run by Captain Charlie Wheeler Farrington from West Bay, and he went to settle up on a Saturday when the ship came in. He said he had caught 300 odd turtles, and he said I know my share was 19 pounds. And he said he had just put an engine in the Adams then. He said I was the only one in the engine room, so it must be chief. I had to be chief because I was the only one in the engine room, so it must have been chief. So he said I was looking to get chief share, because in those days the captain, the owners would get half of the share, half of the catch, and the other half would be shared between the captain and the crew. At the men out on the range. And he says I went down to West Bay and said I got Mr. Ira Walton. He says I got Mr. Ira Walton to drive me all around the island, and he had charged me £2 because in those days when he came back he had to go around the island so people could see you. Just say, "Yo, boy, you look fat. You look fat." Like today, people are trying to go to the gym to slim. You couldn't do that in those days. You had to look fat. And so he went down. So he said he was down to Captain Charlie's place on a Saturday. And he said he was looking over the half of the Dutch door that was open. And he said Captain Bailey was down in his books, studying, figuring. And he said, "Oh, goodness," he said, "what a coincidence." So he said, "Captain Bailey, have I offended you, sir, Captain?" Captain Bailey said, "You offended me? Boy, you didn't know what a coincidence mean." And he said, "No, Captain, that's the first time I heard that word." So he said, "Come in here, son, come in here." So he went in the office, and Captain Miller opened up, so had his big old ledger out. And he said, "Look here, son." He said, "On the left side is what I put out, 107, £2.10. On the right side is what I put in, exactly 107, £2.10. He said, "That never happened before. That's a coincidence." He said, "I wonder if Duke and Baron had the same coincidence." So he said, "Well, Captain Miller, that good then?" He says, "Good, son. We just broke even. It's done to settle today." so he said, the guy told me, said, "Boy," he said, "Steve O," he said, "my heart just went right down into my shoe." And he said, Captain Miller saw his distress, and he said, he went to his safe and he pulled up, saying, "Son, I could give you this £5 note on what I owe you now." But he said, "Don't tell the rest of them, boy. Don't tell the rest of them, boy." So he came up now and he saw, on a Saturday in those days, no banks. Only government saving bank. The only place you could broke a £5 note and stuff was Alvis Spit Bar or Captain Ben's Bar, where they sell liquor. And so he went to see Miss Granger. Miss Granger was sitting there with a little tin pan on her lap. Every time they shave off the 2 and 6 pence on the counter for the QQ, Captain Ben would give it to her. So he went and asked her, "Could you broke £5?" So she said, "Yes." She broke £5. So she gave him 2 6-pence pieces, some 5-shilling notes, a few 10-shilling notes, and he was coming out counting it, and he back up in Master Slicky. Now, the reason why they call Master Slicky, because in those days, when you came off now the range, especially from the range now, you had to get dressed up. And you put on that big old, that cap grease. It would make your hair straight instantly. And sometimes when you go to dance, when the grease started to melt, it would melt all in your color. So I say, Master Slicker say, Tim, he say, where you get this money from? So you look around, you say, come here, man. He say, boy, he say, Captain Billy gave it to me. He say, mustn't tell nobody. And he say, but he did the same thing to me too.
Well, Mr. Ivan, I know you're going to have something to say on that, but we have to take a break now. And when we come back, because that name Farrington rings a bell there, right? So I know you're going to have some feedback on that. Folks, I want to remind you, you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Art Connor, and my guest in the studio with me, we have Mr. Ivan Farrington, we have Captain Paul Hurlston, and we have Mr. A. Steve McPhail. I also want to remind you that For the Record is brought to you by Champion House Restaurant 2 and Champion House Cafe. Champion House Restaurant 2 is located on Eastern Avenue, and Champion House Cafe at 1 Butterfield Place, formerly Comart. Champion House, of course, is a family-oriented restaurant where locals, and I always say others, dine. And For the Record is also brought to you by the Auto Spa on Godfrey Nixon Way. You can stop by Radio Cayman or the Auto Spa and ask for your $5 savings coupon for your next full-service wash. Please stay tuned. We're going to take a short break, and we will be back as quickly as possible. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Art Connor, and my guest in the studio with me, we have Mr. A. Steve McPhail, Captain Paul Hurlston, and Mr. Ivan Farrington. And before we went to hear from our sponsors, Mr. McPhail was talking, giving us a little story about Mr. Willa Farrington. So we have Mr. Farrington here with us this morning, and we will get him to give an explanation. Not Mr. Willa Farrington, of course.
Yes, I made one trip out there on the Jimson, which was owned by Mr. Willie. Captain Joe England was captain.
And what was the relation between Mr. Willie and you, Mr. Farrington?
He was supposed to be my uncle.
Okay.
We went and ranged on a little key out Manwaukie by the name of King Keys. Captain Paul would know about it. And we carried our thatch from here, and we stayed on the northern keys and cut some more sticks. And in other words, the house was already there. It was repaired from year to year. And there was 12 of us on that key, 7 from Cayman and 5 from Corn Island. And I arranged with Uncle Oscar, Uncle Martin, Mr. Aaron Puri. There's just 2 of us left out of that gang now, me and Glenn Puri, that's living. So I didn't leave Mama in the shop to get anything. So all I got from Mr. Willie was fiber, tobacco, and cigarettes. Turtle skin was kind of good price them days, so we changed that with the Wakers. And I got a lot of turtle skin. And we came home, me and Glenn Puri, the rest of them stayed long as you have to catch anything. So I made a trip out of it, but not for what we caught, and I paid him for the cigarettes and tobacco we got. So I made a trip from Turtle Skin. So I can't go into all them stores I hear Steve with, because
you were wise. You had a little business. You had a little side business going for yourself.
I didn't get into that, but I hear different stories. So I guess some of them true, some, but the shopkeepers took a good mauling sometime too, because the fishermen be there for months and months, and sometimes they wasn't catching anything, and the families was getting at the store. So it was 2 ways. Not all the time that they made anything, because they had certain fishermen that didn't know exactly where the spots was the fish, so they came home empty-handed, and so that's the experience I had with it. But that was in '52, and during that time I took a small boat, about 14 foot long, and went 40 miles from King Keys to Corn Island, a sailboat. So that was an experience that, thinking about it now, I could go drown. I didn't know the danger of the sea there. So
Too young to know, huh?
too young to know. And that's where I started off in Corn Island, because every store was a bar. So that's where I started. And I went back there quite a few times lately. I think that's where Mr. Frank McField is now. But
Yeah,
that's
Corn Island, yeah. I keep referring to the legislature, and because I've been doing a lot of reading on the LA's website in relation to the Hansards. The meeting of the 13th of December 1971 in West Bay again. Miss Annie Hulda Borden again in welcoming the president then, who was the governor. Here's what she says. She says, Mr. President and members of this House, first of all, I would like to associate myself with the welcome that has been given to you, sir. And she's talking to Governor Crook, who was the president of the assembly at that time. As our governor, our first governor, according to history, was a Borden, a true scholar, and I hope, sir, that you will have the determination and endure as long as that Borden did 47 years ago. Gentlemen, any of you know about that one?
The Borden?
Yeah, she said our first governor was a Borden,
Well,
and 47 years ago.
I don't know if it's 47 years ago, but
That would have been 47 years ago in 1971 that she was talking, she was speaking.
well, it would have been.
So that would have been then in the 20s.
It would have been. It would have been longer than that, because the first governor, the first guy that called himself governor was a Governor Borden from Borden town.
Who
But
she's referring to?
that was in the 17 and 18. That was 17 something. But that not 40 something years ago.
Oh, no, not 47 years. He apparently was governor for 47 years.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Sorry,
yes,
my
yes.
mistake. It was governor for 47
yes,
years.
yeah. He was. He was. They call him Governor Borden. They didn't GOVNOR Governor. He was Governor Borden, and he ran the country. He ran the country all of those years before the 1831 legislature. Okay. And he was said to be the grandson of the first Bordens that settled here, and they used to call him Governor Borden. And he was a very powerful man. And he was family to the late Jim Borden and them family. And it was through that family that we had one of the grants of lands that in Cayman Islands through that family. But yeah, but remember now, he was not a governor appointed by a governor. He was not a governor
just
appointed.
a de facto.
Yeah, he was not a governor appointed by the governor of Jamaica, because the governor of Jamaica had the administration of the Cayman
Right,
Islands
as well, yes. Yeah.
So, but he was a de facto governor. He made himself governor because it was like Tim say, I was the only engineer in the engine room, so I had to be chief. So he was the only one that proclaimed himself governor.
Yep.
And everybody believed that, because the country had to have a leader in
Yeah,
those
and
days.
Miss Annie, obviously,
Yeah,
I believe it as well.
Miss Annie is correct.
Yeah, we have one caller online. Let's take that caller now. Caller, good morning, and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, O.C.
Morning, Roops. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I could listen all day.
Yeah.
But the pot on the fire will burn up.
Put it on low. Put it on a low fire.
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting to listen to all the history that has been evolved from this program. I mean, we go way back. And you just mentioned the governor. It really wasn't much to be a governor during that time. But governor just the same. But I want to comment on something I heard Captain Paul said. this morning about the prison wasting the money with all these guards when you could use one. That is what they claim they do in Cuba. They put one guard in a tower over the prison with a rifle. We could do that, but we don't want somebody who can go sleep with the rifle.
Yeah, and of course, they would accuse us of human rights abuses also.
Yes.
Right. And yeah, it's all right to have that, but a man can't play around all day and then go to watch at night and think he's not going to go sleep. The body has the time to shut down, and sleep will overtake anybody when the right time comes. So that's fine, and it's a good idea, but we've got to ensure that that man that go in and watch has slept during the day. It's so much said in the program about where we came from and where we are today that gives us food for thought. We need to think. This is what has happened with us. Too many went sleep on watch, and when he woke up in the day, had nothing to eat. and it's what is taking place today with all the stealing and breaking in and things. They're hungry, but they ain't got nothing to go back on. And mentioning people with wheelbarrows going to get water. Well, see, let's just think about the money that has passed through these islands, the huge homes that people have made.
Yep.
And they never had the sense, or well, I guess they thought they had all the sense that they needed, but it didn't make no water catchment. Some have them and will not use them because they're afraid of things like bullfrog. I mean, bullfrog go anywhere there's no water. And we got to learn to have stomachs that can take a little hardship. And I'm sure we don't know where the water coming from when we get it from someone else. But if it was my water, I know where it came from.
Yep.
I could know what to do. If I thought something was wrong with it, to rectify it. But we went sleep on watch. And Steve is a history book.
Yes.
I even got a lot of good stuff too, and Captain Paul.
That's correct. They all do. They all
Thank
bring
you.
bring a lot to the table.
Yeah. I wonder how many of those outside is listening and making note of the things that they hear and deciding in themselves, I'm going to do better.
Yep. And what we want to get on, we want to get some of the ladies on as well. We want to get some of the women on to talk about their experiences when men were out to sea and what they had to go through. And let some of them talk about their experiences with the merchants. But Rupa, I'm going to ask you to leave us there. I want to thank you for calling, and you have a great weekend also.
You too, man.
We have. Thank you. We have another caller online. We're going to take that caller now. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Hi, morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine, thanks. This is Norman from West Bay.
How are you doing, Norman?
Good. Steve-O is what I call him. Captain Paul and Mr. Fanton. We all acquainted with one another. Especially to Mr. Iwan and Steve. You guys remember when we had the West Bay Action Committee?
Yes.
Good. And me and Steve always talk about having something like a Coast Guard into Cayman. And it's so disheartening to see that where we are right now, we should have one of the largest Coast Guard fleets in the Caribbean. Why? Look at our heritage, look at our background as being seamen, right? And here we are still wondering what to do about these youngsters, and it should be almost mandatory that these kids serve a few years into the service once they come out of high school. I will say this morning, Mr. Steve McPhail is the man for the job. What makes him so qualified? He still has the spirit that we need. We need that kind of spirit to instill into the youngsters, that there is no free lunches. We still have an opportunity to make ladies and gentlemen out of the younger generation. I don't know what is going to happen, but certainly something needs to be done. What we have inherited here now is what our forefather would call a generation of dry feet youngsters that most of them knows nothing about the sea. But I just want to say before going off, Mr. Steve McPhail, we discussed this on numerous occasions about getting these youngsters back to sea. You look by the sidewalk, you look into the town, you look all over the island. These youngsters are just lobbering up and down. They say they can't find work. Probably so. But whether you're Caymanian or paper Caymanian, you should be able to serve this country if you're a Caymanian for a few years and try to make yourself something. Mr. McPhail, I'm sorry, Mr. Connor, I'm going to get off, but you know what I was thinking about for the last couple of weeks? That song that Mr. Dexter Borden wrote about the gold field. That would be, in my opinion, that would be so good if you sort of use that
on a Friday morning on this show. Yeah, good idea. Sounds good. Good. Thank you.
Because that is so historical, so traditional, and everything that's in that into that song, it is really Caymanian. So I just hope that you would, consider it. And gentlemen, I'm going to get off now, but have yourself a pleasant day, all right?
Thank you very much, and thanks for that. Thanks very much for that suggestion. We're going to go to the news now. We have our technical issues sorted out. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Orit Connor, and my guest in the studio with me, we have Mr. A. Steve McPhail, Captain Paul Hurlston, and the devil himself in the form of Mr. Ivan Farrington. We have two callers online. We're going to ask those callers if they could please hold on or call back. We're going to get to the news, and as soon as we complete the news, we're going to be back to you. Please stay tuned. Those callers now. First caller, good morning, and welcome to For the Record.
Morning again.
Morning again, sir.
Thank you so much for taking my call again. My friend in Mr. Allman is absolutely right. I think with that suggestion about a Coast Guard, and we have the naturally talented seamen born into them, some young men around West Bay here, just idle, and it's just causing them to get into trouble. If we had something like that, it would definitely help a lot to alleviating some of the serious crime problems we've got. And the idea about the gold field, not because my father was one of the carpenters, or no, there were 4 carpenters who built there, and my Uncle Baxter, who Captain Paul knew so very well, was a carpenter's helper. I have a copy of her register. I gave it to my dear mother, also one of them, because she was so interested in it, the gold field, and would tell me a lot about it, and my father was here working on her builder in record time. The thing there, Mr. Steve, I am hoping, what you're saying, that people are listening, I'm hoping that our school teachers are listening to this program, and I think it should be made a requirement. They can get the humor and they get the real truth and a real history, and it would really put something into the children, a pride in the Caymanian children, and those others who come to live here and go to school here to know what we accomplished in this little island, and all 3 little islands out, dots in deep, deep ocean. Governor Borden there, it was just a title they gave him. by his fellow members of the magistrates, because he was chief magistrate, wasn't he, Mr. Blackfield?
Yes, he was one of the chief magistrates.
Right, and they called him Custos, I believe, after a while, but they were appointed for life, so it's you can see how he could have been governor for 47 years. Because I'm sure they were appointed for life by the British governors in Jamaica. All the magistrates were, I believe.
Well, they were justices of the peace.
Justices of the peace,
yeah.
yes.
But they were called magistrates.
Magistrates,
they were
that's
the ones.
right.
They were the ones who controlled the country, because remember now, there was no formal law, and they would use a piece of law from Jamaica to cover whatever the problem was. It was only until after 1831 that we had formal laws
and
passed.
You had elections,
the elections too.
Yes. Yes. The crime thing. We're a British Crown colony, and I think one of the problems is, this is my humble opinion, I've often said it, is that the people whom we elect, our only voice is the elected representatives. That's the voice of the collective voice for all the people. They have no say really in how crime prevention should be taking place. The police don't have to report to them. They only hand them the money. And the police commissioner is really the boss. And he reports to the governor. And, there's no sense of responsibility to the people. No. And I can't see how we can continue to run things like this in this modern day and age with our elected representatives having no say over the way crime is supposed to be effectively dealt with or anything. I don't see it work. That's just my humble opinion. We can't have that. Our elected representatives, they really have no say. We might create this thing about this, I don't know what the commission is called again, some sort of security thing or whatever it is.
National Security Council you're talking
about?
Right.
I don't think that's worth the paper it's written on. Anyway, thank you very much, gentlemen. Have a great day. Listen on. It's such a good program. Hope the school teachers are listening.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. One more caller online. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. Connor. Good morning, Mr. Steve, Mr. Paul, and Mr. Ivan.
Good morning, Raymond. How are you?
Morning.
Yes, so just here, I listen into you, most enthused here in the interesting conversations, and no work today. I did 3.5 hours for the week. That's not very much for the heavy equipment, so I was tuned into you every Friday morning. I do that once I get chance if I don't have anything doing.
Mm-hmm.
And one interesting story I would like to talk about. I have a wealth of knowledge and information as being one of the middle-aged men from Cayman Brack. I would like to talk about, if you all got the information, well, I have quite a bit, but just to confirm, who was the youngest master mariner, sea captain, produced from the Cayman Islands? Now, in Cayman Brack, Captain Radley Scott, my brother, became captain at age 19. I think Captain Edley Martin, good morning to you if you're listening in, Captain Edley Martin, I think he told me he was master mariner at age 21. And according to history, Little Cayman produced the most captains of any island in the Cayman Islands, because I think there was a shipwreck master mariner that actually took up residence in Little Cayman and started teaching seamanship and navigation to the youngsters in Little Cayman, whoever was interested in that, and the young men from Cayman Brack as well. And Little Cayman is recorded as having the highest number of master mariners as any place in the Cayman Islands, or one of the highest in the world per capita.
Yeah.
That's quite an interesting thing. Also, I would like to talk about the establishment that I was the founder and the pioneer of the Seaman's salutes and honors and memorial aspects of seamen. Any seaman, whoever passes away, is remembered by contacting a ship that that is approaching the island and arranging for a memorial ceremony to be held in the sense of ship passing by close to Cayman Brac or Grand Cayman and sounding its horn from 5 times, and it has been as many as 35 times. It was done for the late district commissioner, ex-district commissioner, the late Mr. Garland Jackson.
And how do people communicate that information to you so that you will know if someone has passed? If someone has passed away.
On Cayman Brac, whenever someone being the island is small, we all know each other and we know whoever passes away on Cayman Brac, and then the next approaching ship that is coming nearby the island or passing through this area, I will do the radio communications to the ship and then make the request, and then 99% of the times the captain just agrees with it and passes by the island, and I will travel to the location where he's passing, the nearest point, like the Spot Bay area where the ships are going west or going southeast or northwest, passing that area, and how my handheld radio and my big binoculars, and I'm equipped for that purpose, and when they get off the person's home or the nearest point of Cayman Brac, then I will say to the captain, you may sound your ship's horn now, commence sounding your ship's horn, and for 5 long blasts or 10 long blasts, or it can be as many, like I said, up to 35 was done for the late Mr. Garland Jackson. It's quite an unusual thing. I don't know of anywhere else in the world that this is carried out in remembrance of our seamen. And the first person I done it for was the late Captain Earl Houston, which was the captain of the Kirk Express for many years. I had one of the big tankers that were owned by national bulk carriers, came by a mile off with a Yugoslav captain, and he sounded the horn 10 times while Captain Earl Houston's funeral was taking place in the Spot Bay Cemetery. And ever since that, it has been continued by me, and also celebrating the Queen's birthday, the Queen's Jubilee. I called in ships for that, even to celebrate Mother's Day and Father's Day.
Okay, caller.
Here I was last night.
I'm going to ask you to wrap it up now, though. We're going to have to go to a break, so if you can wrap it up for us real quickly. Hello? Okay, we've lost that caller now. Gentlemen, I just want, again, going back to the meeting of the Legislative Legislature on the 13th of December, 1971, Miss Annie, and I alluded to what she had said about tourism, but I want to read it verbatim. Print is fine, so you have to bear with me. She says, I shall first deal with tourism. I agree that tourism is a valuable asset to our economy, but we should not put all our eggs in one basket. Before tourism was ever introduced into the Cayman Islands, I think it was the year 1926, we had one visitor by the name of George Allen England, who wrote an article, The Islands That Time Forgot. Well, ever since that, we have been progressing, and I feel that tourism, while it really adds a lot to our economy, we must not go all out and think that tourism is everything. Before tourism was ever actually introduced, we had seamen who braved the 7 seas, and they were the beginning of our prosperity today. I shall have to call his name now, deceased, the Honorable Albert Panton, who a lot of people criticize, but who was a very foreseeing man. He had it first of all for our government, and he was very instrumental in getting this island to produce seamen. When I say produce, I don't mean to raise them. I don't mean to raise them, to have them go out and face the wild seas, and their earnings brought back what started our present economy. While I repeat, tourism is a good thing, but it is not the only thing that we have to study. We have to study local conditions and our own people and try to go forward as fast as possible. We have this tourist board, and I must say there are very able men on it, and maybe women too. I don't actually know. We have a chairman, a man who I think put his all into the job and has made a good success of it. But her point there was that Seaman and Mr. Albert Panton. Now, before we get to this, Mr. Markfield, I talked about the LA meeting in West Bay and the fact that the noise, of the construction, and that was actually what was said in the Legislative Assembly. But you have another take on that as well. And can you share that with our listening audience, please?
Yes. One of the reasons also for the Legislative Assembly meeting in West Bay was to calm the people's anxieties that had arose between that time. Remember, in 1969, in December 1969, the legislature passed the Development Control Law, which controlled the use of land, particularly. One of the things that the law enacted was that you could not take any sand from the beach. Traditionally, that's how Caymanians had gotten the sand to build their homes and the cement to take it from the beach.
And to beautify their yards.
And you could not build a house unless you had an acre of land.
3 acres, excuse me.
Yeah, of land. And you could not traditionally go start building your house and living in it. Caymanians would build a house and put a top on and then go in, live in it, and then keep finishing it. You could not do that unless you had an occupancy certificate from the new department that was going to be open, and that the government would be owning the swamp lands. That was the thing that broke the back. Now, one of the first subdivisions that came in the Cayman Islands was Captain Reed's subdivision down in South Harbor, and Mr. Fossey Arch and Jim Borden had started the subdivision, started to develop land, and they saw this as an abrupt to them developing their land, because they want to make land for every Cayman who could own a quarter acre lot to have a house, and they saw the government at the time trying to curb that sound development. So as a result of that, in the spring of 1970, you had the largest demonstration this country has ever seen. The demonstration started at the old Princess Alice Park, Princess Royal Park, and it was led by Gilbert McLean, Burt Watler, Miss Annie was the head of the march with Mr. Berkeley Bush and Mr. Jim Borden and Mr. Ira Walton, and they marched up to with hundreds of people with placards. I have the whole thing of some of the placards were saying this is communism, and we want our way back. We want to get our lands back, and we want to live the way we were living before in Cayman. And they went up and saw Mr. Long up at the old government house, who came out and spoke to them, invited them in, and said that they would try to do something about the new law. At the end of that meeting with them, they went back to the park and they had a meeting, and Miss Annie addressed the crowd and Mr. Berkeley Bush and Mr. Burt Watler and stuff. But the British had the warships waiting outside to see if there was going to be a violent demonstration. But it was the largest march that had ever taken place in Cayman, and all people fainted because they were waiting in the sun for so long to get to speak to Long, and they were even selling ice cream at the march, and it was although it was very serious, it's also hilarious, but the Caymanians were worried about it, and so that's one of the reasons why they took the legislature someplace else, so that the people could come and see what was going on with their swamp lands and the new development plan.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you there. We have 2 callers online. We're going to take the callers first, then go to the break after. First caller, we're going to ask you, because we're getting low on time now, so we're going to ask the callers to be as brief as possible. First caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, gentlemen. Number 1 from the Bronx.
Number 1, morning. How are you?
Oh, rough and regular. I just want to ask you something. Can you speak about something else besides cement?
Yeah, what else you want to talk about?
I just want to say special thank you to Reverend Lee King, because if it wasn't for him and one man named Mr. Johnson, we mightn't have a hospital in Cayman today.
Yep, I remember Reverend Lee King. Had an experience with him when I was deputy supervisor of elections, as well. I think he wanted to stir up a little thing in the BRAC, some time ago with us there, and we had to come over there. But yes, he's done a lot for the BRAC, and a big shout out, yeah.
Right,
Is
and
he,
he was the man that started the Bluff Road.
is he still alive, or because he moved back to the States?
I spoke to him some months ago.
Okay.
Up until then, because I don't forget people like them. And his wife was the one that started up the rest home, not the government. They have it over now, but it was the two of them that started those things on Cayman Brack. I can tell you that, and I can prove it.
Excellent. That's good. Good to know. I do remember Reverend King. Yes, remember him.
Okay, gentlemen, I just want to put on your thanks, Reverend Lee King and Mrs. Barbara King. You did your job good, and Mr. Johnson, I can't remember your first name. But anyway, you all did a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, number one. Thank you. Next caller, good morning, and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning. How are you, gentlemen?
Fine. Morning. How are you, sir?
Good. Okay, good morning to you. All right, and of course, see, Mr. Hurston, Mr. Franklin.
Good morning.
Morning.
Cardinal here.
Yes, sir. Distinctive voice. Couldn't miss that.
Sorry, excuse me. I've been wanting to do this, all right, for quite a while. I want to congratulate you for the way in which you appreciated your dad's hard work for you to get you educated.
Thank you.
I still with your dad.
I know. Yep.
And of course, everybody calls everybody by their last name. Connor, DaCosta, whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about it, how I don't think that the average person who stayed home realized the sacrifices that our seamen made for Cayman and their families. I know that, for instance, if a guy even wanted to mail a letter, he'd give 50 cents or $1, whatever the case is, to the agent to mail his letters, to buy stamps and mail his letters for him. He wouldn't go short to even mail. I remember one time we were in a port, and it was a nice little bar down by the close by the dock, and also the post office. And I said, Connor, I said, let's for sure get a barrel. What you think you can mail your stamp in main time? He says, oh no way. But I says, what about? Don't you need to go short? Let's buy some clothes. No, he says, I'm gonna go to the slop chest and buy what I need to work on board. When I'm going home, if I needed some fine clothes, I'll buy them then. He says, I'm not going to go ashore. My family need my money. The same thing I remembered with Norland Brother Smith. I can't remember his first name now, but Steve Smith and his father, and also Ebert.
You remember his name?
Today, Ebert's daughter has become very educated and responsible, holding responsible positions in companies, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, Captain Paul says that was his name was Kingsley Smith. Kingsley. Captain Paul says his name was Kingsley Smith.
Kingsley Smith, you're right. Well, they were three outstanding men that I sailed with. That's only three. There were other guys I can't remember their damn names right now. Also Carl Ebanks and a bunch of.
And in what capacity you sailed in engine room or?
At that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, at that time. No, at that time, I tried both deck and engine room. I want to say this. I studied navigation with Captain John Huddleston, who was a great guy. And in fact, I came first in my class. And but I tried the deck for a while. And they said, well, one of these days I want to get married and have a family. And I don't think sailing the deck and becoming a captain, that sort of stuff, is going to suit me. So I went in the engine room after a while. At that time, I was on deck, right? And this is where I know that Connor, for instance, used to call me in the morning to, Ricky, get to work. You know what I mean? And I also remember Whitman Seymour.
Really?
I don't want to hold you up too long, but I pulled the trigger on him one time. He came and shook you to wake you up, and I acted as if I was dead. I rolled up my head and that sort of stuff. And he says, "Come on, get up, let's go." He says, "Get out of bed. You got to go. Get your breakfast." He says, "Get to work." He says, "If you don't do that, dog going to eat your bread." So and I acted. I was dead. And when he took out that room, he said, "My God, something happened to him." And he started going out the door. I called him back, and why he really blasted me for it. But anyway, that's just a part of my remembrance of sailing with my guys at sea. The sacrifices that they made. And you know what? I just want to say this last thing is this. Knowing the sacrifices that fathers had made, and at that time there was nothing like insurance and that sort of stuff. And those days too, they had nothing saved up, but whatever they could save for their older years. So right now, I think that some of those children that were well educated by their fathers, they should at least see that the proper insurance is in place for them. You know what I mean?
Yep, that's true. Yeah, we have to. We cannot forget them. They're like the war veterans in the U.S. You know, they served us well, and they deserve whatever we can give them now. That's right.
Anyway, gentlemen, I enjoy listening to and of course Steve. You know, he's really. Some other time I'll call in about what I studied about 32 Storm and how many ships or vessels we had in Georgetown at the time when it struck also Cayman back. So
great.
Some of it I'll call back.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Cardinal. Thank you for calling in. Thanks for listening. We're going to go to a break at this point in time, folks. I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Connor, and my guest in the studio with me this morning, we have Mr. Ivan Farrington, Captain Paul Hurlston, and Mr. A. Steve McPhail. Please stay tuned. We'll be back shortly for a wind-up. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, we have Mr. A. Steve McPhail, Captain Paul Hurlston, and Mr. Ivan Farrington. And as usual, we're talking about Cayman. In the days gone by, we're talking about seafaring in the Cayman Islands, reminiscing, and a lot of our callers have been reminiscing as well. We have one of those callers online now, so we're going to take that caller. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning again. This is Raymond. Yes, sir. I heard you all mention about the women and their involvement with the seamen. I recall there was a lady from Cayman Brack that used to sail with her husband. Some of you may know him, Mr. Garston Grant, which was chief engineer with National Bulk Carrier.
Yeah, I know him.
Miss Hetty Grant. I used to sail with him. He was on the Universe Ireland, which was one of the biggest tankers in the world at that time.
Yeah, when she came out, she was the biggest, yeah.
That's correct. And I know the late Mr. Mercharito, he sailed on the Universe Japan. And when I was working with Cayman Energy when the boom was on here in 1977 through 1979 into 80, when the boom was here, the Universe Ireland had came to Cayman Brack, and Universe Explorer and Universe Bomber and all those were here, and then after that they sold out to Stena Bulk. Now, most of those ships that Caymanian seamen sailed on, the only one that I know that is still in existence was the Stena Constellation and the Stena Concordia. They were sold to Petrobras of Brazil and converted into floating production and offshore storage off the coast of Brazil. So two of those older tankers from National Bulk are still in existence. They were refurbished and converted, and they are at anchor off the coast of Brazil, and tankers go alongside of them to load crude oil. They are a storage tanker there's a pipeline connected from the oil well to those tankers pumping the crude oil from the oil well to the tanker, and then the tanker stores it, and then in turn transships it to other tankers. And some of them has been passing by this way, the ones that been loading from those old national bulk tankers.
Okay, that's great. That's good. That's good information to know, and for a listening audience to know as well, caller.
And hello. And the gentleman that you were talking about in Little Cayman that taught navigation was a guy called William Page, and he taught navigation and things to the Caymanians, and he married into the Arches family and taught them how to build schooners.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Raymond, we have to wrap up now. I'm told by our producer that we have to wrap up now. So thanks again for that information. I want to say to you, have a great weekend and stay safe. Gentlemen, we've come to about that time again. I'm going to give you all a minute each to wrap up. I know, Mr. McField, we talk about navigation, and you have your story about that where you tried it also. But when you took the test, if you can quickly tell our audience, your stint at learning navigation.
Yeah, the most extensive thing that you could do as a man in those days was to be a captain. Mm-hmm. And so my grandfather, my family wanted me to be a captain. Got all these books from New York from my uncles and stuff, navigation and trigonometry, and did stuff and things like that, and sent me down to Captain Tom Dias. I was down there for about 3 months and more, and one day my grandfather saw Captain Tom Dias at Shirley's shop, and he inquired from Captain Tom. He said, "How's my grandson doing?" And he said, "Well, let me." He said, "Your grandson not doing too well." He said he should find a profession that he can talk to make a living, but he said not to be a captain. And he said, "Well, why?" He said, "Well, I gave them their first examination." And he said they were supposed to take a ship from Georgetown Harbor to Negril and into Kingston. And he said, your grandson wound up in Germany.
So that's why you became a lawyer.
And my grandfather didn't speak for 6 months.
Captain Paul, any closing remarks?
Well, just to thank you and the listening public for putting up with me for these couple of weeks, and especially today. And I'm just happy to pass on any little knowledge or information I have.
Lots of it.
I'll be, anytime I'm asked, I'll come back on. I'm not going to charge you anything, but I think with all these trips I'm making here now, I should be on salary. But thanks again for having me. Have a good day.
Thank you. And Mr. Ivan, I know you say you wasn't on island, so it wasn't you that they had to have that those sessions of the Legislative Assembly in West Bay to prevent you from writing, and it wasn't you, right?
No, it wasn't me, but I'm part of it. I want to make one announcement before I forget it. The other day was a meeting. I told them that they only had six more masters in the world, but that wasn't true. They got 120 in the world, and 2 is from Cayman. One from Cayman, one from Cayman. So Mr.
That's
McCaw,
a pretty good ratio.
Captain McCaw, and Captain Scott. So that's still a good thing. And I enjoyed being on the show. I guess by next Friday, the leader of opposition will be here, so he'll take my place again.
But we're going to still make some space for this to happen. These conversations to continue to happen.
And I got some documents that I can get you read to from the assembly there.
Excellent, great. Folks, I want to remind you that you have been listening to For the Record, and that For the Record was brought to you by Champion House Restaurant 2 and Champion House Cafe. Champion House Restaurant 2 is located on Eastern Avenue, and Champion House Cafe at 1 Battlefield Place, formerly Comart Supermarket. Champion House is a family-oriented restaurant where locals and I always say others dine. And also, For the Record was brought to you by the Auto Spa on Godfrey Nixon Way. You can stop by Radio Cayman or the Auto Spa and ask for your $5 coupon for your next full service savings for your next full service watch. I want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keeper. Also, this is October is the month for older persons. There is always someone who is less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to hold out a helping hand to them, and if not, that you should contribute to a worthy charity. And we always leave you with the words of Mr. Bill Withers, and I hope that our system is running for us to play that with the song Lean on Me. Please stay tuned on Monday. Come back to us on Monday morning.